the stream title will be, because I can't edit that. But we are live.
So we are still the unwilling servants of
I
draft.
I think that we're still playing GHA.
So we are still the unwilling servants
Yeah,
of draft.
that's fine. That's fine. Because we're still doing this. That's fine.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, friends. You know, I'll pull up the spells.
Hello, everyone.
We'll talk about this. Yeah, that's good. Okay. So tonight, we already have. You're probably the only viewer in chat right now.
Right now, it's the two of us and Captain Mymorph.
Hey, Mymorph.
The two of us and Captain Mymorph.
Hey, Mymorph.
Hey, there's Manda.
We've got people.
Hey,
It's going to be an interesting stream tonight because I'm hosting LMA, not John, which means we're not going to have any music as far as I can tell. So you're going to have to deal with our lovely, lovely voices. I hope that works for you all. But we are going to be talking about RP in combat, which ought to be pretty
which is
fun.
always a fun topic.
It is a fun topic.
Hey, Pat. Good to see you. Storm Power. Welcome.
All right. All right.
Hope everyone's having a good evening.
Yeah. Hi, guys. Let's give everyone a couple extra minutes to get all in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So I feel like I want to have my notes up for last one because there was I think there was some stuff that we didn't touch on. Is there anything you want to talk about this time, Fant?
Ooh, well, I mean, talking about RP in combat, there's the interesting things that happen going from first edition, and I can't speak to BX, but I mean, kind of the same idea, and what started happening along the way, and how it kind of affects combat in terms of both combat itself and RP for it.
I'd love to hear about that. We should start with that.
Okay, you can do that.
We'll do that, and then I've got some stuff that I can show. All right, let's kick it off,
Jay, good
folks.
to see you.
Hey, friends. We are. Hi, people. Oh wow, it looks really bad. Jeez. Okay, I will grab these two things. I will copy them. Do we have sound now, people? You should hear us.
Hello.
I see readings from you, so now they should hear us. I had to like really quickly cobble together a view for this stream because I only had the ones for Monster of the Week ready to go. So I apologize for any bugs that might be coming out in this. Just keep us updated. Let us know. But we should be good to go. Is everybody hearing us? Are you seeing that? I can just turn it up on my end. Are you seeing that? Yes, I can hear us. I can hear us. All right, we're good. We're good. Hi, people. Welcome to LMA. It's going great so far. It's going great. Welcome to Loremaster's Arcanum, where tonight we will be talking about roleplay and combat, following last week's stream where John, Phantom, and I talked about introductions into role-playing and how to use 5e as sort of a tool to assist you in creating unique and fun characters. Tonight, we'll be talking about, well, you have your character now, you've done your cool roleplay, you've made your fun voice, what do you do in combat to spice things up? So, we're going to chat a little about that. Phantom said he had some fun stuff he wanted to talk about as it relates to first edition. What you got for me?
Yeah, So here's the thing. Back in the earlier editions, and it's something that's kind of made role playing in combat for me as a DM and as a player a little bit trickier. Back then, you had the different armor types would have differences in, the weapons would have different speeds. Um, they would hit differently depending on the armor type, and you could kind of play off that a bit. Now it's, every weapon. Honestly, unless you have a special ability that uses a lesser weapon, you're probably going to use the best weapon thematically that you have
Yeah, I mean,
for
for
pretty
example,
much
like
everything.
the light hammer deals like a D6 versus a scimitar, which is a D8 or something like that, like, or a rapier, which
Right.
is a D8, like, or actually scimitar versus a rapier. There's almost no reason to pick a scimitar over a rapier because a rapier is just more damage. They're both
Right.
finesse. Or for example, like
Hmm.
a dagger. The only advantage a dagger has is being thrown. Like there's certain weapons that are strictly better than others. Like I believe it's a maul versus a great sword. A great sword deals, or a great axe. A great axe deals a d12, but a maul deals
Hmm.
2d6, which is technically better because you're not ever going to deal one damage. You're only going to ever deal 2 to 12, and your average is 7. Um, I totally agree with that, and I think that there are gaps in 5e's rule set, along with 3.5 has a lot of the same issues. I'm not sure about 4e because I've never played 4e,
Hmm.
but one
I
thing that
played 4E, and I honestly can't remember what the 4E was a really really different thing because 4E had this thing where everything was a special ability.
yeah.
All classes had at will abilities that they could use every single time, which kind of you didn't have generic swinging your, with the exception of opportunity attacks. You had no generic swinging the sword.
Yeah. And that's one thing that we really want to get into on this. And that's one thing that we can use as inspiration. I can even pull up the 4E rule set, I bet. But when you are in combat, this is an opportunity for you to not just take your turn, roll some dice, say, I hit the thing, and move on, right? Because
Hmm.
it's a role playing game. 2/3 of that name is dedicated to role playing. You know, it's a game at the end of the day, but we're here to tell a story, and storytelling, in my opinion, doesn't end when you start a combat. You,
Right.
if there's a lot of debate amongst Star Wars fans, and I think this is a good mini topic to talk about as to what makes a good lightsaber fight, because the prequels loved big flashy lightsaber fights that were just lightsaber fights, whereas the original trilogy had very meaningful lightsaber fights. Like the final fight between Vader and Luke showed this struggle in Luke to overcome his inner darkness, and you see that when he's wailing on Vader with his lightsaber at the end. And you see that anger in him, whereas Anakin and Obi-Wan is just sort of a really flashy fight. And it's cool and it's fun. But to me, the Anakin and Obi-Wan one is a bit over the top and perhaps not as good at telling the story they were hoping to tell as maybe the Vader versus Luke one.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, it was just the two of them. It was the big flashy finale. It,
Exactly.
I mean, I thought it kind of got silly, but
Of
that's
course.
a different
Not to
story.
say that silly and flashy can't be had in D&D, because of
Right.
course it can. I think it should
Mhm.
be had. But if you're hoping to tell a narrative in your combat with the way your character is fighting, lean into
Right.
that. Like Alcott is an extremely weak character. If he picks up a sword and starts
Mm.
having to hit somebody with it, he is desperate. Things are not good.
Right.
Um, Go on.
So, so where you run into issues, and part of the issue with like the going to just blanket pick the best weapon, that you can. I mean, you don't have to. Obviously, if you want to thematically use a lesser weapon, that, hey, please, by all means, go ahead. Um, but part of it is the fact, because there's no longer any weapon speed. There's no longer any incentive or disincentive for a specific weapon, other than you choosing something that's more in line with how you want your character to play. Um, it also impacts, in a way, it impacts the role play of combat for melee
Mm-hmm.
specifically. Because
Yes.
let's face it, there's only so many ways, or actually even worse for ranged, you know, either archers and such. There's only so many ways you can describe shooting an arrow.
Yeah. It's the unfortunate part. And I mean, you don't want to lean into where you hit them because that's more the DM's responsibility to tell that story than yours. And so,
Right.
like, I notch two arrows at once and hold the bow sideways and shoot it. You can only say that like once per combat before it starts to get old. And I totally get that. That's why I like certain things about the ranger in 5e adding spells onto their arrows, because now you can begin to get into describing those things rather than just I shoot a bunch of arrows right now, but eventually run out of spells too.
Apparently, I haven't gone through the latest of the Rangers stuff.
Yeah, so Ranger has they have Flame Arrow, which just makes it to where you can turn some of your arrows on fire. Um, Hail of Thorns, which basically turns an arrow into a shotgun. There's a couple of spells that you can do. Um,
Okay, that,
yeah,
that adds variety.
it does, and
Uh,
I think that the main purpose of that was talking about what you were just talking about, and this is one thing that I think the Battlemaster fighter subclass in 5e does well for that system. It basically adds these maneuvers that you saw a lot of in 4th edition and older editions that fighters might have had that we don't see in the newer edition for all fighters, but Battlemaster has. And I think
right.
leaning on those as inspiration for what you do in your combat maybe doesn't have mechanical outcomes that you're hoping for, but it can still allow you to say, oh, for this sweep, I go down and sweep the legs with the sword, trying to get him in the heels. I have a question for you, though, Phantom. What do you think about HP and its value as the amount of blood you have or the amount of sustainability within a combat?
Here's where we go back to the way things have evolved, because the further they got away from really honestly, all the combat simulation type thing, the wargaming type aspect that D&D was initially born from, as in terms of the rule set itself. Um, the it kind of saw an evolution in how you have to handle HP, because HP from a 5e perspective, as how much blood you've lost and such, makes no sense whatsoever.
None.
No, I mean, you can't. It's got to be more. To me, HP in 5e has to be almost, and it's kind of bad because it's already an exhaustion mechanic. For me, it's almost pretty much an exhaustion mechanic. It's the point at which you cannot take any more, and it just actually kills you.
What
It can be
I
combination of hurt, a combination of actual pain and wounds
Yes.
and such, but because of the fact that in 5e, the only way the overnight long rest healing makes sense is if this is not a wounds thing. Because
Yeah.
otherwise, that just means your players eventually actually have overnight regeneration.
Yes. And have you ever played Starfinder or looked into Starfinder at all?
Actually, no, though that's coming soon.
Yes.
That's on my list of things.
Starfinder. I play Starfinder every Monday with Chandler Markov.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What I like about Starfinder in the aspect of HP versus what it's called in that game is stamina, is they split the two, and your health pool is split in half. You have stamina, which you regenerate every 10 minutes if you spend what's called a resolve point. So outside
Okay.
of combat, if you spend 10 minutes, you can sort of, catch your breath, get back into it, and keep going. The other
Sure.
half of your health pool is your HP, which is your blood value. That is how much physical damage you can take, and that only recovers every long rest, and it's only a certain amount every long rest. And so
Mm-hmm.
I like that idea of a split health pool in terms of describing it in combat, and also from a balance standpoint of like you're not detrimentally injured when you get down to half your HP, because as a character you have the ability to get to that point and still push past it.
And yeah, I mean, I be interested in reading more into that, because that sounds that sounds like a great compromise between the two.
Mm-hmm.
Because here's the other issue that you run into. It's like, okay, well, if HP is more of a stamina thing with some, then you have, basically getting shot with an arrow. I mean, it's one thing to tell me that a weapon, somebody was beating on, you're wearing plate armor and you're getting beat on with the sword, and eventually, you can't take anymore, and there may be a wound somewhere or other, but you get shot with an arrow. It's a physical wound. There's
Yes.
no, there's no, little nick here, little nick there. That's so I run into this issue where as we move further away from the wargaming side, and some of it needed to happen because 1E, as much as I love 1E and 2E, even 2E at the time, it was crunchy as all hell. I
Yeah.
mean, it's like I watched Jay run his Thursday game, and the benefit, his memory recall for the rules of Phantasm. He's just doing these calculations in his head, and I remember having to do those back in the day, and was not a heck of a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But we did what we had to do. It's just now we've gotten so far away from that it kind of, you need to think about it in a different way, because again, I mean, anyone who says long rest, well, you get all your health back, doesn't make any sense. There, if you think about it in 1E 2E terms, absolutely right.
Yeah.
Castles and Crusades takes a more of a 1E 2E look at it. However, they also add the bandage mechanic, and you can get bandages that you can get basically 1 or 2 hit points back. But my rule, and I think the general rule for it, is only 1 bandage per wound.
Yeah.
You can't basically wrap the character in bandages and call it a day.
Well, Eamon would beg to differ on that. Um, but I like where your head's at with that. One thing that you mentioned about the like getting hit with an arrow or getting sliced with a sword, like sliced with a sword, I can see more like you're actively in a melee. You can dodge these, or they can bang up against the flat of the blade up against your arm or whatever. An arrow, if you see someone about to fire an arrow at you, arrows are one of the most dodgeable projectiles. They significantly more dodgeable than bullets, I would say, but that doesn't make it any easier to do, especially if you don't have sight on this person. That's where, like, you say that it bounces off of your armor, or like what Mystical Unicorn said, it just happens to graze your shoulder. Like, as a DM, if you need to describe these things as how your characters or how the characters are taking damage, or how your monster is taking damage, or whatever, that can help to better describe for your players how far into the fight they are. And that's, I think, one thing that's important in RP and combat as well, is it from the DM's perspective, is imparting upon your players knowledge as to how far through this monster's blood they've gotten. Like, because you don't want them to feel like they're doing really well when they're only a quarter of the way through, and you're over describing how much they're attacking this thing. You got any thoughts on that?
I mean, yeah, I think that covers it well. And then what you run in, here's the other issue you run into. It's like you're describing melee, and I'm going to harp on melee combat, because honestly, for me, when it comes to role play, give me a spellcaster any day of the week, because you can have all kinds of fun. And I've got a particular example for role playing a spellcaster.
I'd love to hear it.
Not even talking to myself, but from a melee standpoint, here's the other issue that you run into is, okay, you start describing the combat and the hit the person took, and you're the DM, and you're just saying, where the guy got hit, or the enemy mob got hit. As a player, my first thought is, well, I'm going to keep hitting that spot, or keep trying to.
Yes.
It's I've seen enough Rocky movies to know. No, you hear a rib crack, you keep hitting that rib. It's like, so you run into this issue. It's like, well, okay, at what point does this become a called shot, and B, it's okay. Well, how much damage can they do before you reasonably have to say, well, now their thing's really, really hurt?
So I have just pulled up the 40 Martial Power 2 book with the martial exploits, and like, this is, I think, really, really good inspiration for what you can do mid-combat. Like, you storm into the midst of your foes, ensuring that their attacks are directed against you, or you follow up a quick slash of your weapon with a powerful punch from your free hand. or grappling strike. You hew your foe with a simple attack and then grab it with your empty hand to keep it from escaping. Like, these are things that you can describe doing, and maybe even your DM will allow mechanical benefits to doing so, especially if you have a free hand to do so. But looking at 4E is a great tool.
I've often said that I could fix 4E really quickly, and all I would have to do is take the at-will powers and put a little more limitation on how often they can be used. Because, again, my problem with 4E combat was the fact that every single attack was at-will, encounter, or daily power. And some of them like these, they sound like kind of melee weapon attacks. Some of them they're just, for different classes, it's just Pat 66 mentioned it's very MMO-ish, and
yes,
it kind of is. It has that feel to it. If they had cut back on the at wills and not made them quite as prevalent that they could be used every single turn, that would have been for me, that would have been a lot better. And beyond that, I liked some of, but that's outside the scope of this. But there were other things about 4E that I actually liked.
It was Wizards of the Coast that made this, right?
Yeah. I'll tell you something. The original 4E Dungeon Master's Guide is one of the best Dungeon Master's Guides ever written.
I have the 4E Dungeon Master's Guide somewhere behind me. I'd pull it out, but we have boxes in the way.
I was going to say, if I didn't know we were going to discuss 4E, I would have gotten all my 4E books out. I have the entire set.
Well, I think 4E obviously has its faults that we've talked about before, and we don't really need to get into that. I just think that there are literally 5.5 editions of D&D to look at and use as inspiration, because there's just so much content out there. And that's one thing that John likes to bring up when he talks about Dragon Mag and Dungeon Mag, and when we talk about, older editions of the game and looking through those source books, because there's just so much content that a lot of people overlook nowadays, because Wizards of the Coast just keeps putting out another $60 book every 5 months or whatever. And that's great, and they're good, and there is good content in those books. I don't deny that. But there's free stuff that you can be looking at that has existed for decades, that was well written by people who loved the games. And I mean, obviously, Wizards of the Coast, there was some guy at Wizards of the Coast that was just really excited and made a bunch of abilities, and probably should have been a video game creator more than a RPG creator. But that doesn't mean that you can't use this for your benefit when, if you make a fighter and you want to be creative with it, write some ideas down. Like, write some combos down on a piece of paper. What I did with Alcott, and this is what you were mentioning with spellcasters, is every spell you cast has some sort of combination of verbal, somatic, and material components. That's a lot of room for RP as a player. Oh, yeah. And when you have that much room for RP, I think that if you don't take advantage of it, you're just going to sit there and say you cast Lightning Bolt, and then you're going to wait 20 minutes for your turn to come back, and it's going to be really boring. And especially for a wizard, because that's pretty much what you're going to be doing every turn. But if you play it more tactically, like I do with Alcott, or if you get into the combat more with physically, how are you casting these spells? Verbally, what are you saying? Where do you draw your inspiration from to do these? I think that that's huge.
So, yeah, in that vein, first of all, my old 1E and 2E wizards are saying, wait, I was able to cast every round? Because, oh man, they suffered.
Yep.
As a matter of fact, poor Lee, who I think is still working at the moment.
I think so.
Played a wizard, may he rest in peace, in the Friday Night Crusades game. And let's just say, for a wizard, he was a fine connoisseur of daggers.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, it was pretty common for wizards to hold a crossbow back in the day, right? Because it was basically magic missile one turn, crossbow the next, right?
I don't even think they were able to use crossbows.
Oh, really? I thought that hand crossbows were a thing that wizards could use.
I'd have to look. It's been a...
Nope, they weren't allowed crossbows. Darts. You're totally right. That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, no, they had darts, and I let them throw the daggers if they want to.
Yeah.
But so talking about RP and casters, BlueBoxCon. sitting at the table, was running the game on stream for, the game on stream downstairs, and I had Jacob, who I believe is Josh's cousin. I think that's
Yes. Yeah, he was
or
playing a caster, was he
Jacob.
not?
He was playing wizard of the group, and he had a very style. He had a personal style to how he cast, and it was basically he made origami.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, and he was sitting there, and it was funny because he was kind of like role playing it as he was prepping his spells as he was going, and he didn't let on what he was doing until he cast his first spell, which was a lot of fun. But yeah, no, it basically he was, and just I let him go. It's like, he wants to create origami pieces to prep his spells. Go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that that's really
that's
neat.
great. That's what I've
Yeah.
seen before.
You've got a lot of room to flavor text, let's say.
Yes.
And that's one thing that I wanted to mention about weapons earlier, but when it comes to magic especially, it explicitly states in pretty much every book of D&D as far as I'm aware, please feel free to correct me, that magic users don't have specific verbal components unless you're in a couple of settings where they do have specific ones. Like every magic user uses magic differently. That's why when you get another magic user's or another wizard's spell book, you can't just read their spells. You have to copy it from the way that they understand magic into the way you understand magic and then cast it.
I don't remember. I mean, it's been a long time since I've looked at that part. It makes sense. I
Yes.
don't. And again, I even if it wasn't written that way, I would prefer that people be able to make the spells their own. There's no reason not to. I'd almost go so far as to say, even if it was supposed to be said a certain way, the intonation had to be different,
Mm-hmm.
or had to be the same, but the words could be whatever they wanted. They
Exactly.
had to find a way to make it work.
I like
I
it from the
it is
perspective
Yeah.
of like plucking strings. Like you have to hit
Mhm,
certain notes, like a singer
mhm.
would to cast that spell in that way. It's like because the weave of magic, I imagine, is like a literal fabric of magic around. You just have to pluck those strings in the right way to make magic exist in the way you want to see.
And I mean, the other part of it is, the idea. I like the idea that when you're doing something, casting magic, something fantastic is happening.
Exactly.
So describe it as such. I mean, I don't care. Honestly, even if the spell's a minor spell, if they want to be a little over the top with the description of it, go right for it.
One of
Just
my
go
favorites
ahead.
that I made was Fear. Alcott learned this from a necromantic spell book, and I knew I had to come up with some components for it. So I use Latin as my verbal components because I play Alcott as a very, in my mind, traditional wizard. He uses very traditional language, casts in a very traditional way. That's how I imagine him, and that's how I created him because that's how I wanted him to be. You don't have to do this at all, but I like the idea of the material components for the spell is a dried hen heart pierced with a feather. And so he has this in his spell components always ready to go. And
Mm.
hold hen heart in palm of hand, whisper vocal component until heart floats, and then forcefully speak it into the heart. Like he just repeatedly says this word until it starts to float above his hand, and then he just shouts it really loud, and just this cone of fear emits forward. I really enjoy that because it adds that little tang of magic is happening here. Something
Mm.
weird is occurring, and you should lean into that.
So checking in on chat for a bit, each surf, I completely agree with you as far as players should be allowed to make up with what they say. And I like the idea of asking what for like a bolt of a magic missile, whatever, what
Yeah,
color it is, like that. It's little things, something to give it their personal flair. Amanda, I if you can find that adventure with the
ASL.
uh the ASL and PSL into the game, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
I'd love to see that.
One other thing that I'll mention, I think it's Dragonlance as a setting where they have a specific language that magic has to occur in. Actually, why don't we go to my Instagram really quick? My Instagram. I did not spell Instagram right. That's why it's not coming up. Because I talked about this very thing not that long ago. I talked about spell casting components and where we can get inspiration for them from. Oh, yes. Otherwise known as... Oh, well, I guess I can't. I'm not logged in, so I can't see it. Otherwise known as the language of magic, Low Magius is the language used by wizards for verbal components in the world of Dragonlance. There's a specific language that if you're playing in Dragonlance, you have to use to be able to cast spells. If your DM has that... What was that, Robert?
It suddenly occurs to me how long it's been since I've read the Dragonlance books.
Yeah. I was doing research on it, and I was like, wow, that's interesting. Specific words, huh?
I probably knew that once upon a time, but...
Mm-hmm. And I mean, not just other source books can you get inspiration from. For example, on the left there, Rune Words is from the game Diablo, specifically Diablo 2, where you pick up these little runes that are just individual little, like, RU or NES or whatever, and you combine them to make rune words that, when combined, suddenly have power. Alone, they are inert. And these individual syllables create language that makes magic happen.
That's cool.
Which is pretty neat.
Jay just mentioned that, yeah, Dragonlance Moon Phase is really affecting spellcasting. I do remember that part of it, and a lot of it had to do with the fact that you had the 3 different robes and the 3 different towers, for the black robes, red robes, and white robes.
That sounds similar to Wheel of Time.
And there was also, for the spellcasters, they also had to go through the trial. Yeah, red, white, and black. Okay, that's what I thought.
That makes sense.
They had, I had a red robed wizard in my Dragonlance campaign 30 years ago back in college, and she used to torture the DM.
Wizards are good at that.
And the thing was, my buddy who was the DM, he just made the mistake of putting the wrong items in her hands, and things happened, mistakes were made by him.
Siegelin's in chat making fun of me saying "tang of magic."
Tang.
But you can also get inspiration for somatic components as well from lots of different stuff. Any of you who have seen the Marvel movies know that Doctor Strange has some pretty awesome somatic components when casting spells. Just slam your hands together and do some cool stuff. That is also takes inspiration from Japanese culture. Specifically, there are different what are called I think they're called mudras, which are similar to mantras. Mantras you speak when you're meditating. Mudras you do motions with your hands, and that's where we get things from, like, if you've ever seen Naruto, the hands motions that they do. In particular, Kuji-in is a type of mudra that I think it's like 12 signs that are supposed to help you, like, realign while you meditate. And there's lots of inspiration you can get from other cultures in things that they do as well, for somatic components at least, but for lots of stuff.
I just saw the thing with regards to changing the properties of a known spell based on components, like webbed, regular versus phase spider. It's an interesting concept.
Interesting.
I would probably allow that. I'd have to consider the implications of that. It's like I'd have to consider the implications of that, because normally if one of my players starts asking me about that, there is something that
they have an idea. Yeah, you want to be careful because they have a plan.
There's a plan there, and it's going to get sprung on me at the
worst moment. Yep, exactly. So I think Magic users have an edge when it comes to roleplay and combat, because there's already a built-in system that tells you that your character is doing something while they do it. Now, what sucks is that system, for most source books, does not tell you how to do it. In fact, it explicitly tells you it won't tell you how to do it, because magic is done in many different ways. That is room for you to do what I did with Alcott, which you can see here on the screen, is create a entire list of how he casts his spells. And really just have fun with this. Imagine I sat at my desk for 2 hours creating my spells from 1st to 5th level. And I looked up Latin components. I imagined hand movements as I did them, and after you create those, what Eat to Surf mentioned earlier is come up with how those spells then look. Like, describe the visual components of your spells. Alcott's magic missiles look like arrows shot from bows. Or his shield spell is not just a bubble that appears around him. It's literally the family shield appears in front of him momentarily. Like, describe. Have fun with it. Really, really just enjoy casting spells because it's part of the fun.
Yeah, and I think that also goes towards special abilities too. Because going back to melee for a second, there are so many ways. There are only so many ways, especially if you end up in a large scale combat where you're going to be doing this for a while. There are only so many ways to describe swinging an axe, swinging a sword.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, when you have like the special abilities, that's when it becomes important that barbarians raging. Well, okay, what does that look like? How do you get yourself in that mindset? Um, using any of their abilities outside of the weapons themselves because you're going to need that. Otherwise, it just becomes mindless. Or well, you sing your sword, blah blah blah. You hit no, okay, yeah.
Moving on.
And even as a DM, it gets difficult to keep finding ways to describe how you hit. So you need something to play off of.
Yeah, and I think that's actually something I want to touch on really quick is did you hit nope, moving on. Missing is also part of the roleplay. You swung at this guy with all of your force and intent to harm and missed. Why? As a DM, why did this character miss? Describe what the monster did to cause the miss. It could be a really heavily armored guy and just they hit them in a section of armor. And sometimes it's that easy, but that just goes to show why this thing has the AC that it has. It informs something to your players that they can use later as information when they're doing roleplay and making decisions in combat.
And I tend to use how much did they miss by as a gauge to what that looks like.
Yes.
If they only miss by one, they probably glancing blow off a shield, off the armor, or maybe even a parry or something to that effect. So something got in the way. It didn't. You didn't land you didn't land a blow hard enough to harm. If they miss by 10, you telegraphed your attack. Saw the arm raise and easily stepped aside and let you swing at the air.
So Eat to Surf mentioned something that I totally agree with, and it's that most people who are new to role-playing, like the people we were talking about last week, tend to role-play more in combat until it's not rewarded, and then they stop doing so. I think that is true. I think that most people, when they come in to play these games, that they haven't done role-playing games before but have played other types of games, want to describe how they do this cool big hit or something fun and unique that they do in combat until they realize that there are no mechanisms in place for them to do so. I think that that's your job as a DM, to guide them toward the things that they should be saying mechanically that they want to do, and yet still allow them to describe the way that it occurs, for the most part, in the way that they wish. Like, if they want to grapple a creature, let them go for it. But if they want to describe that as tying a rope around them, they might not have enough time to do so, but they can whip a rope around them to assist with the grapple, maybe as a garrote or something similar. Like, I allow these, but there's yes and, but there's also no but. Both ends of the spectrum work. Give them something to work off of when you're playing.
I'm laughing because you mentioned grapple, which is like the bane of dungeon masters everywhere. And
Stop grabbing my guy!
I'm pretty sure nobody has ever understood the rules for grappling in any edition ever.
Nope.
Sigland, you said I done that in our game. Which particular piece?
Tying a rope around yourself? I don't know what the rules for grapple in 3rd edition are.
I think 3rd edition is the one that everyone refers to specifically as being problematic or not well understood. I could be wrong on
that. Either way, it's, as a DM, you also have an obligation to describe things as you fight, because it will encourage your players to describe things as they fight. You don't want to take over that for your players. Allow them to do so. Ask them, how do you do this? How do you attack them? It doesn't have to be the Matthew Mercer, which is every time or whenever they get to the end of the combat, allow the last player to get the killing blow to describe something, which, you know, is successful on
Mhm.
their show in some ways. But maybe every other attack, just ask them, hey, how do you do that? What does it look like when you do it? And I'll describe how it maybe misses or hits, or how it
There's
affects the
also,
monster.
yeah. And also, to bring some flavor to the combat, have the player's character suggest that they talk while
Yes.
they're doing this. The taunting their opponent, while they're swinging, taunting their opponent if they're playing a character with a high charisma is perfectly perfectly good way to spice things up. Have them try to rally their friends, whatever the case may be. Something more than just swinging a weapon, because otherwise it becomes drudgery.
Yes.
It's especially if the combat's going to go long.
Yes. Like in 3.5 edition, there are actual mechanical implications for attempting to make your opponent afraid of you, intimidate your opponent, whatever it is. That might not be the case in the game you're playing, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And like what Phantom mentioned, some fights go on for multiple sessions, like our combat with the Kraken in the most recent session of Rune Lords, and the one before that, and part of the one before that. Um, but one thing that I did as a player in those sessions was remember that my character is just a person facing off against a terrible foe that just will endlessly attempt to kill them. And if you remind yourself of the reality of your character, it makes it a lot easier to make certain roleplay decisions, like Alcott slamming his fist into the dirt, hoping that the stone shape would bring a sphere up around them quicker, despite the fact that that's probably not how that works. It adds flavor to it, and it really shows the desperation of your character in that moment, and it lets the other players around you know he's not in good shape, or things might be worse than we think.
Mm-hmm. And there's also, if one thing I like to do is, if my the players are faced up against multiple mobs, and they're not only they're starting to the players are characters are starting to win, and they're also basically having words with the thing. There's also might consider morale checks. I mean, there might be a morale check anyway, but if they're if you're getting beat on and your opponent is telling you that they're beating on you as they're doing so, might bring it on a lot sooner. And especially if you're playing in a game like our Castles and Crusades game, where there's not as much there's not a heck of a lot of healing, you might convince the enemy to see the field much quicker and save yourself some damage. Um, on a different note, one of the things that I like to do, and I tend to do this, and it's kind of interesting because I've never actually asked a DM if I could do this. It just happened. If I'm using a special ability,
Okay, I see green. I think we're live.
yeah.
Okay, we're back to live. Sorry, folks.
So yeah, I mean, one of the things that I started doing, and I think I started doing, it was a Sunday game that I was playing, and I was playing a barbarian, and I forgot what the
Okay,
storm
I see
barbarian or
green.
what, and my barbarian had tattoos. He was a Goliath who had tattoos, and I just decided that as I was like doing certain abilities, that his tattoos were going to start glowing. Should they have?
Eh,
There's nothing. There's no. there's nothing connecting them to the abilities, but it was just a non-invasive way. It doesn't really change anything. It's just complete and utter flavor. Actually, I think I did it in one of the games that might have been one of the convention games that John ran that I played in, where I had a cleric who was her eyes started glowing as she was doing certain spell casting, or especially when she was doing something like turning undead. The radiant vision and so on and so forth, because you need to add little things. It doesn't change who the character is, doesn't change what the character can do, but it gives a little more oomph to the proceedings. Just let
Yeah.
yeah, if they want to do something like that, I'm there for it.
I've got a character concept for a wizard that tattoos his spell book onto his body rather than using an actual book. Now, maybe that works, maybe it doesn't. But conceptually, I like the idea of when he casts the spells, those spells alight on his skin and then race down to wherever he's casting that spell at. I like that idea visually. Would a DM allow that? Maybe, maybe not. And you're very limited on the size of your spell book at that point.
I, I That's one of those things where I don't know. It isn't that I wouldn't allow it. I'd probably want to have you think through the ramifications of your spells being available to somebody else and what happens if somebody decides that they want your spell book.
Just take a little slice. Yes. And I mean, but that's one thing that Eat to Surf mentioned in chat is DM should allow that, but give it a pro and a con. Like if your character's eyes start glowing in combat, the enemies might start targeting them more because if they're healing all their party members, but they're this beacon of light, maybe, oh, we should take them out instead of this fighter dude who keeps trying to hit me with his shield.
Well, I mean, listen, if you're playing had played any MMO, everyone knows you go after the healer first.
Healer first every time, and then you go for DPS and tank last for sure. But I mean, that's not something that your DM will always do. And as a DM, I think that you have a responsibility in combat to play intelligently, but not too intelligently, if that makes sense.
There's a great book. What's his name? Keith. I'm not sure how you pronounce the last name. If it's Amon or Armon, I can't remember.
Okay.
But it's called "The Monsters Know What They're Doing."
I love these books. He's got a website too.
Yeah, I actually follow him on Twitter as well.
Yeah, it's themonstersknow.com. You guys should definitely check out this website.
And it's one of those things where and I think he's got more monsters know what they're doing.
Yep, look at that.
Aman or Ammon.
Amon, I think.
Yeah.
But yes, this is actually, I've gone to this website a number of times as a DM before big combats that I knew would have ramifications for the players, because I want to play them from my perspective intelligently to the monster. Like, I want to let the monster do what the monster would do. A pack of goblins, once like 2 dies, are going to run away. They're not going to sit there and fight to the last man unless they are compelled to do so.
Well, I mean, I can give you an idea if you want as how effective it can be.
Sure.
Our Friday night game. I've had an issue where, any straight up fight, unless I really pump up the number of enemies possible, and even then it's kind of hard because I have to toe the line between really just starting killing characters or making it too easy. Because it's a large group. It's 8-person group, and even though they're only second, third level, they can do some serious damage if they go first, and we're using group initiative. So, in that vein, there was part of the adventure was one of the people that they had actually freed turned out to be part of their adversary's crew. They didn't know it at the time. They met him again, and turned out he had fallen in with assassins who were actually there for other reasons, but decided that the party was going to get in the way. This party that was holed up in the tavern, who was taking out basically everything I had thrown at it, like a piece of cake, was getting attacked by 3 assassins outside the building and causing them all kinds of grief because they knew where the attacks were coming. They didn't know how many there were. There were only 3, and they basically were pinned down until they finally came up with a plan on how to get past it. Still nearly got one of their party members killed, and the one assassin even got away because as soon as he realized that the jig was up and he was going to get caught, he left and left a nasty surprise for one of the party members to find. That's how I nearly killed Lee's second character.
I think playing tactically as a DM is fun, but you don't want to overdo it. You're not. Your monsters shouldn't be master tacticians, depending on the monster, of course.
Yeah.
But
these were assassins. They had a plan.
Exactly.
And they executed. And let's put it this way: as soon as it became a straight up fight, as soon as they figured out where they were and how many of them there actually were, the problem was it took them a little too long to finally just rush them when they figured out the position. So, it was one of those things where the party kind of played into my hands because I was just going to sit there and until they made a move. Once they did it, they killed 2 of them really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
The third one, they unfortunately didn't do it en masse. Only one person ran after them and ran right into the trap. If they had done just a basic look, would have had it better, but still didn't die, but came very, very, very close.
Yeah, I like what again, Eat to Surf, you are rocking the chat right now. Thank you very much for all of the chat. And everybody else who's in there right now, thank you guys very much. But I think what Eat to Surf said is really interesting. As a DM, you can win every time because you have an infinite amount of monsters you can throw at a limited number of players. Remind yourself of that as a DM and create what I like to call, and what I've learned from certain other systems, a consistent mythology. Your stories should make sense within the bounds of the realm that you're playing in and the world that you've created. A pack of goblins wouldn't be 90 for the most part. That's a war band of goblins that are being held together by orcs and hobgoblins, and that's a different type of problem that would be combated with a different type of solution by the players. You need to have it make sense when they're in combat, and this is something I was mentioning earlier. When your monster's taking hits and your players are missing on the monster, have visual things ready to go, or at least an idea of what it looks like, to describe to your players how far along in the combat they are, especially up against a singular big monster. Like, if your dragon is stumbling on its first hit, then they are going to be way overconfident on their attacks. A couple of first hits, even large hits against a pretty decently sized dragon, should not bother it in the slightest. It might feel that later, but it's not worried about it right now. Later down the line, when it's taken more and more and more hits, when those start to stack up and the wounds begin to, similar to Smaug in The Hobbit, when that one hit has created a weak point that you can then take advantage of later, that's what you should be describing. Like, all of these hits against the dragon should glance every single time if the dragon is old enough. Nothing will be able to pierce its hide unless you keep hitting that same spot until eventually an opening, and that's when it starts to get hurt.
Yeah, I mean, going back to what you mentioned, and DM, that's why anytime I hear stories of DMs bragging that they killed a character, it's like, well, duh. I mean, it's like, okay, sure, whatever. It's one of those things, and actually, that's another part of the role play is it's possible to make an encounter where you realize, well, I might have gone, or I might have on 5e. It's actually even harder because there's so many possible combinations that sometimes just to make an encounter challenging, the CR system in 5e is it's garbage.
It's horrible.
It falls apart on so many levels especially after they start adding all the additional source books with the new kits, because new kits keep getting more powerful.
Yeah, power creep is huge. But we're not here to talk about that.
And yeah, no, but so but what you get is that fine line where you can't, you almost have to eyeball it,
Mm-hmm.
because the CR system is not going to tell you anything. It keeps telling me things are deadly that my party's taken apart in 2 rounds. It's like, come on, let's get serious here. So you have to find other things that can happen, and figure out other ways that, uh, not necessarily to save the party from themselves, but to compensate. I mean, listen, there's nothing saying that the bad guys have to kill the party.
Exactly.
It's, but the trick is role playing it in such a way, especially their actions, that it's clear that, one, you're not just basically throwing away and saying the party can't die, because that's not right either. But make it clear that have a way to make it clear that something else is going on here.
Yes.
Harass, whatever. Find a way to get the party to lay down their arms.
Yeah, I mean, running away is always an option. Like you mentioned earlier, morale checks are something you could maybe even force on your party, because
I don't like making. I don't. I would never force the party to make a morale check.
you could
If they
make
have an
them.
NPC
How about a
with,
sanity check, or like a is this smart check?
I don't like that, mostly because of the fact it takes agency away from. I
Okay,
don't like anything that takes agency
I
away from
agree.
the players.
Just as a
As a matter of
concept.
fact, that's also why I don't fudge die rolls.
Really, never.
Because yeah,
I
nope.
fudge. I don't fudge all the time. I will occasionally fudge if I can tell that a player is just really downtrodden by a combat.
Because once I start fudging die rolls, then I'm. I mean, granted, yes, though I can kill a party at any given time. I don't want to be. I don't want to be in the business of deciding not so much who lives and dies, but once I start fudging die rolls, I've decided, okay, it's okay for this character to die, but it wasn't okay for this character to die. How do I justify that? It's, I have an NPC. Yeah, that if there's an NPC with the party, have the NPC make a morale check, and
Yeah,
they're just like, nope, nope.
yeah. I mean,
Um,
we did mention this a little bit. It might have been last week, maybe the week before. DMPCs are, in my opinion, a sign of a maybe not so seasoned DM, because you kind of want to tell the story and play it at the same time. But having a partner or an NPC that follows the party can be smart. It can act as a almost a guide rails in terms of like, maybe we shouldn't do this because this is me, the DM, telling you that, but it's also in character telling the characters that. You don't have to do that every time, and you should never lean on that too much. But I don't think there's anything explicitly wrong with having a party friend who helps out making decisions sometimes.
so my 5e campaign for the first 7 or 8 levels, 7 or 8 levels, I had well, actually, starting probably at level 3 to level 7, I had a DMPC with them, only because of the fact they had 2 spellcasters, and
Mm,
it was very hard to find. It became easier. They were missing some stuff. They needed someone who had more thieving ability, and they had none whatsoever. So I had a
yeah.
bard for them to give them some stuff. I've gotten rid of it since, because now they're the 4 of them. They're 11th or 12th level. They've got enough power that they can use knock spells and whatever they need to get around. The things that the bard was doing for them. And the bard actually, with the bard, not on purpose, but seemed to draw the wrath of my dice, where the bard would end up taking lots of damage, and was kind of an indicator of like, okay, well, no, this might be trouble. Uh, and that just kind of worked out. It happened on its own. But yeah, I don't fudge die rolls. I understand that the dice rolls can be terrible for somebody at time. I, it's the kind of thing where, let's put it this way: if it's all die rolls, I mean, sometimes you're just gonna have a streak like that.
It seems like the
And
chat is totally against you. They all like fudging dice.
no, I mean, I'm sorry, I can't. I can't do it. specifically because of that whole, okay, well, who lives, who dies?
Yes. And that is a
I don't. Yeah.
that's a difficult decision to make, and that's a whole different topic that we can have. And I'd like to maybe make this an LMA as well, is role playing in combat from a DM's perspective, like tactically playing monsters. How do you play? Like, do you ask your players at the start of a campaign, what difficulty setting are we playing on? Because if I knock you out, am I supposed to then kill you, or do I move on to another player until I knock out everybody and then you're just dead? Like, if your monster is non-intelligent, they might just rip into you until you are fully gone. And Eat to Surf mentioned that killing players in 5e is kind of difficult. I tend to disagree with that on some ways, because one hit on a downed creature in melee is 2 failed saving throws instantly. The next hit, they're dead. It doesn't matter how much damage they take, they're dead.
So, I mean, killing characters in 5e is, um, if you start off in, I kind of sometimes I kind of think that if you start off as a DM in 5e, it's actually easier to kill characters than if you're coming from an older edition, because I found that it required a completely different mindset, um, when building an encounter, mostly because of the fact that starting at first level, these characters have a heck of a lot more abilities than, standard AD&D character had, probably up until about fourth or fifth level.
Yeah.
They've got more hit points. I mean, I remember listening to even 3 and 3.5 or what, or I guess Pathfinder 1E, when that they were rolling dice in Roleplay like the first day, and I'm listening to these die rolls, and I'm like, oh my god.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's
Well,
like insane.
it's like you rolled a 27. What?
Yeah, I made a level 3 character that has like +8 to hit, and that's like pretty nice. I mean, compared to 3e, that's not as huge, but the main point of what we're saying right now is to say that there are lots and lots of forms and fashions and ways to role play what you're doing in combat, and you should never look at combat as just, now's where the game begins, let's stop role playing, let's start rolling dice. And the joke that John likes to play off of, that was in that one Dragon mag, it's not a role playing game with 2 L's, it's a role playing game with an E. You have to remember
Mm-hmm.
that playing as your character is at the heart of what you're doing when you're at the table, and remembering that they are a living thing that has a limited amount of ability to stay alive, will help you to inform the decisions you make when you're not only tactically playing, but when you're role playing what you do. If you're a barbarian with tons of HP that takes half damage from everything, and you have that ability that lets you keep going as long as you're raging, and then after you rage you die, you're gonna just go. You're gonna hit as hard as you can. You're gonna do everything you can to attack and attack and attack. But if you're a wizard, you're gonna sit at the back and hope you don't get hit or noticed.
And here's the other thing. I mean, in combat for like a wizard, there's other using your support spells is also important. It's that's there are things that a wizard can do. There are times when, and this goes back to just general role play, letting your players, the characters shine. They don't have to always shine in combat.
No.
I had just finished a game run on Kayla's stream where the poor ranger just, well, I mean, didn't get to do much in terms of combat, but she was the star of the show for a good portion because she was the one doing the tracking, doing this, that, and other things. Let them shine. Now, there are 2 things I want to bring up from chat. One was Sigland, regarding me rolling low, there was the Friday Night Crusade game where I nearly killed the entire party because I rolled in one combat session 7 20s.
Wow. Wow.
Now, in Castle and Crusades, we decided, because the standard rule is there's no critical hit on a 20. We didn't like that, but at first level, it was too dangerous to do double damage. So we were doing, or double dice. So we did basically max damage. And at one point, we had one combat. They kind of stumbled into it. Their tactics weren't great at the time, and I just kept rolling 20 after 20 after 20 after 20.
Robert.
Oh, Oh, they were going up and down. They got knocked down several times. Actually, they got lucky because a couple of people came into the game as the combat was in session, and it ended up pretty much keeping the group from
That's
wiping
great.
because I was like, what, you guys stumbled into this massive room where there were lots of goblins. Wasn't supposed to happen this way. And yeah, the chaotic monk decided to aggro the entire dungeon. It kind of felt that way.
Yeah.
But the other one, and there was another one, I think, Eat to Surf mentioned, regarding the Frank Menser talking about whole game modes
Yep.
without in
I was
combat.
going to talk about
I've,
that as well.
I've had many sessions where there's been no combat. Especially my 5e game. I've gone probably. We've been playing for I guess about a year, little less than a year and a half. We're getting close to a year and a half. Or actually, no, we're probably about the year and a half now. I would say. Um, I would say probably at least 1/3 of our sessions, if not more, have had no combat.
Yeah.
Uh,
And I think those are some of the best.
yeah. I mean, it went with the story. There was no particular need. There were things that needed to happen. It's also a very open-ended campaign. The players can go where they want to. So I'm reacting to what they're doing, and if they decide that they wanted to do, they do a shopping trip, or they want to gather intelligence on, the things that they're looking to. I mean, I leave it that there might be possibility for combat, but it's going to take what they want to do. As long as they want to role play it, I'm going to let them do what they're going to do. And if we get to combat, nope, that's fine. Great, we'll have it. If not, we'll wait till possibly next time.
Yeah.
I don't force. I don't say that there has to be combat in a game ever.
And if there is combat, it should be something that, you continue bringing the role play into, because that is going to really, as a DM, I mean, especially because you are the arbiter of the game. You are the first line of defense when it comes to your players understanding how they're going to be playing the game at the table. And when you set up a game that allows for role play and allows for these unique moments that these players can have at the table, and letting those moments shine when they're in combat especially will encourage it even more, and you'll just see your game flourish. And I promise it's going to be a lot of fun. And whether it's spellcasting, whether it's hitting enemies with swords, whether it's whipping enemies, shield bashing, however you describe what's going on, shooting an arrow 6 different ways, have fun with it. Let yourself have fun with it and imagine visually what's going on. If you have difficulty with that, then maybe ask others for some inspiration or look up some inspiration, and that might help you too.
Mm-hmm.
But
I mean, yeah.
No, go on.
Well, I mean, it's the kind of thing when I think about it, it's like, well, all right, it's meant to be, it's a comedy, so it's meant to be partially silly, but the combat in at the top of the cliff in Princess Bride, where the two of them are the sword fight, and they're doing all kinds of, they're jumping on rocks, they're basically doing gymnastics where with the pole and the horizontal bar, and
Yeah.
many stuff like that. I had a player in the 2-shot that I just did. He was playing a monk and he wanted to jump off the horse, and I'm like, oh yeah, do what you want. I'll let you, if you want, I'll give you an idea of what could possibly happen. But by that point, he wasn't worried about it. He's like, yeah. I was like, okay, well, let's stick the landing now and see what happens. And he actually rolled a 20 for sticking the landing. So I was like, something, go ahead and attack. You landed perfectly on your feet in combat stance. Go for it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if it had been close, I probably would have said, you stumbled a bit, you managed to get there, but not this round.
Yeah. And I think as a DM, there is always room to have fun with moments like that. Let creativity be creative. Reward it. You don't always have to reward it incredibly. Giving your player an attack after jumping off of a thing is not incredibly overpowered. That's kind of in line with what they should be doing on that turn anyways. But allowing them to do it after a stuck landing makes it even more powerful, you know.
Yeah. By the way, this is also one of the reasons that I, even for 5e, I don't like. I don't well for. I understand it for set adventures, for published adventures, because you kind of need to be at a certain spot. I I I prefer using XP. It's partially maybe it's partially old school for me, but I switched over to just like doing levels based on certain sessions, and I kind of regretted it for my personal game, and I won't make that mistake again. Um, but being able to reward for role play, my Friday night group, they are absolutely off the wall.
I've heard.
It was it. I mean, if you want to get an idea, all you have to do is hang out. You don't even have to listen to the game. You can just basically hang out in the channel and watch the memes start scrolling by, because it'll give you a pretty good indication of what's actually going on during the game. I There are times when I really honestly I don't have to do anything. I just let them go, wind them up, let them go,
Yep.
and let them take it from there.
When that happens
Uh,
for the first time as a DM, the pure amount of joy you will feel is indescribable, because you have created a world that they enjoy playing in, and they don't need you anymore. And that's weird that it makes you happy, but I promise it does.
Last Friday, I nearly passed out. I couldn't stop laughing because, and the funny thing is, the whole thing started when we came back from as we were coming back from taking a break, and there was a conversation that started between the characters started role playing in the middle of it, or maybe it was supposed to be like out of character discussion.
Mm-hmm.
It just ran right into character, and I couldn't stop laughing. It took a good 25 minutes before I could compose myself and finally try to get a word in to see what they
Yeah.
wanted to do next, because they were just going.
Well,
It's
Evelyn just dropped in chat. We are going to start raiding into Lord Gasumba soon. Thank you guys so much for coming and tuning into this LMA. This was a great stream. And keep up the discussion. If you guys aren't in our Discord, check out the link I'm about to drop in chat. Please head on over. Every Friday, like Robert has been saying, he does Castles and Crusades. Can you give us a quick sales pitch before we leave?
So basically, this is the least commitment-oriented game ever. There's a link to the player's handbook on the Troller Game Store. It is absolutely free. There is no commitment. You can just roll up a character, show up when you're able to show up on Fridays. If you show up late, that's fine. If you have to leave early, that's also fine. If you can't make it in a given week, that's still also fine. The more the merrier. If you have any questions, please by all means hit me up. I'm happy to answer. And yeah, the current group needs to be committed. Probably most of you.
And we, as Blue Box, stream every Sunday with Rune Lords at 1:30, every Tuesday at 5 p.m. in Greyhawk, and we do LMAs every Wednesday
Central Time
at 5:45. Yes, all Central Time. And we're gone.
and we read.
And we're gone. I realized
I'm like